There's a certain kind of information function in Excel that, for want of a better term, that we might call error checking functions. On the Formulas tab in the ribbon, if you click More Functions and then go to Information, you will notice a function called ISERR, ISERROR. You'll also see a function called ISNA, and there's one called NA. Let's explore some of those in this section, and very often, but certainly not always, these are used along with the if function. There's also a new function in Excel 2007 that goes by the name ISERROR, and you'll see how this plays out in comparison with some of the other functions that have been around in Excel for a while. Here's a worksheet, nothing too unusual about it. It's heavy with formulas. I could quickly hit Control tilde here, no Shift key, readjust the column widths, and you'll see pretty rapidly that tons of formulas. What happens sometimes when you're not thinking ahead or it just hasn't occurred to you, and I'll hit Control tilde again and readjust the columns. Who would have thought that a formula here that's calculating profit change from month to month, here's an example. This particular formula, you probably learned something like this back in the 6th grade before you were using Excel. If you made $20 profit or $20,000 profit, whatever it is here for April, and then the next month you make $40,000, that's a 100% increase. And you see what's happening in other months. We're tracking sales changes, expense changes, profits changes month to month. And then it just so happens that on a given month, maybe this number is getting adjusted. I'm going to make the expenses here be equal to the sales for this month. So simply make that a 240. And that's going to turn the profits into 0. And you see what's happening down here. This formula is now trying to divide by 0, which of course is an impossibility. And that's why we get the division by 0 error. Now, what do you do in a situation like this? Some people just leave it here. I mean, it is true, it's accurate. It doesn't apply in this case. But if you're going to be making a presentation or you're going to be printing this, usually you don't want people to be asking questions or you don't want to have to explain this necessarily. You'd probably like to have a different answer. So there are a couple of different approaches here. Now, what I'm going to do is change this formula, and then, as you would expect, we'd be copying this into the 3 cells to the left and to the right to cover other potential situations as to what might happen here when this is 0. Another aspect of this, too, which I don't want to cover, but you could imagine wanting to cover, is if these go negative, then you're going to be coming up with some very unusual answers, too, that you might want to screen out. Let's just focus on the idea here that we have an error. Here's one approach to this, and this is the time-honored or the traditional approach in Excel before 2007, which still works. A function used within the if function. And in English, here's what we want to say. If this calculation somehow comes up with an impossible kind of calculation that will be an error, we'd rather not see this. So right here in front of the function, but after that initial parentheses, we want to say is error, left parenthesis, right parenthesis. If all of that is in error, comma, what do we want to do? A lot of us will want to put in nothing, in which case it would be double quote, just leave it blank. Other people might prefer to put in as text, NA. And a third option, not so obvious, is to use a function called NA. Like all functions, it's followed by parentheses. The difference will be this will have a pound sign on the view. That may not be to your liking, but that's what it will do. So the logic so far is, if this calculation is going to give us an error, we want to display this, or the 2 other options you might have seen as your choice. If not, we actually want to see this. I don't want to type that again, so I'm going to highlight this, hit Control-C, or the copy button is available if the Home tab were present. Control-C, click out here, Control-V, there we go, and one final parenthesis. And it certainly makes the formula look longer, and so on. And as is often the case, happens to me too, for sure, yes, I'll accept this. Usually this gets it right. Yeah, and that's what we want to see. I had too many parentheses. In Excel 2007, there is a new function. I'm going to write it under here so we can compare the two. But instead of having to repeat that over and over and over, and let me temporarily put a space in front of it and just leave it there so we can see it as text. Well, make the column wider too. There we go. So we can see that at least temporarily. Do the same formula over again with the new function, IFERROR. And this makes it substantially shorter. But what we want to do here is to say, if this calculation, this left parenthesis F4 minus E4, and that's, I'll just click on the cells up here. If this minus this, right parenthesis, divided by this, If that is an error, what is it that we want to do? Comma. What's the value when that's an error? Maybe we'll just put in the NA like we did before to be in sync here. And we don't have to indicate what we do otherwise because it will simply use this calculation. So we're all done here except for the final right parenthesis. And there's the answer. And displaying it momentarily so it can compare it with the other one. A lot shorter, a lot easier to read, and just more succinct. And as soon as you discover this, any other situations where you had been using the longer version, which was required in future versions of Excel, this is a lot better. The ultimate end is the same. You either want to display an NA as a function or possibly nothing, or you have different approaches here. And what I'm going to do is simply move this here, drag it with the right mouse button, do a move there. Looks like that. And in a real life situation, of course, we would copy this to here. And what happened here is it did copy the format. So before I do much more here, what I'm going to do is copy this format to here and then recopy this. There we go. And copy leftward as well. So the other numbers won't really change, but it does cover those situations. So this is certainly one approach to doing this. Now, when you have the NA in different situations, if you're trying to evaluate this, if you have this entered as a function, and that's what I did here by putting this in, if you have formulas elsewhere that somehow need to refer to that, you can use this function, equal ISNA. Does that have an NA? And we know it does here, and this might seem rather obvious to do that, but it says true. Now, let me line it up with that column properly. Are the others up there? Well, of course they're not, and that's what you see there. Now, I'm not really pursuing this any further other than to say you can check for the existence of ISNA. Now, there's another small variation on this too. If you're looking at data in one location from another location, sometimes you want to check if it's in error, and you will notice, and it's sort of a subtle distinction, but at least be aware of it, there is the ability to say ISERROR or ISERR. And what's the difference? ISERROR, as it says below, will check to see whether a value is an error. And you see in parentheses in the pop-up tip here all the things that it looks for. And what's the difference between that and using just ISERR? It doesn't check for the NA. Subtle difference, probably won't make a whole lot of difference to most people, but just be alert to the fact that there is a difference there. But I think the bigger question might be, why are we using this at all if the new function called IFERROR is around? I think it's a better approach. So just some ideas here behind checking the accuracy of information and somehow screening out the kinds of things you don't necessarily want to show in your worksheet. And I know some of you wouldn't want to see this. A reminder once again, going back to this particular function here, maybe we don't even want to show this. Maybe we want to show nothing. How about double quote, double quote? So different situations where you can use these functions at your own discretion.